I can't say any of this is wrong because I get it. I mean, it really does resonate. Like, I get the truth of it. And a lot of the feeling of resonant truth comes from days when I was doing lots of drugs. And part of what I'm attracted to about the Buddhist path is that I felt like I achieved a certain type of enlightenment or connection with Godhead or whatever you want to call it, when I was doing a lot of drugs and meditating somewhat. It was, in the years of my first meditating and yoga and sexual freedom, and so, it's experiencing everything in my early 20s. And I said things like, one can't have any money problems if one has no money. Very similar to one can't have any problems if there is no self. You can't actually have a problem unless you're there to experience it. And I was very clear up until my early 20s, maybe, or maybe just my late teens, that emotions were just a hindrance, that they were just this thing that confused and sullied the mind and the clarity of perception. I didn't even use the word logic. A lot of people use the word logic, and it really triggers me that they're just like, well, it's totally illogical. And I'm like, logic is not the only tool for which to perceive reality. It's just it's kind of like logic. It's pedantic. It's a good tool, but it's pedantic. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's so linear, and it can be useful. Certainly can be useful for communicating with people that you don't know where the fuck they are, if they're present at all, or if they're lost in some fantasy. You can step them through step by step, so anytime they get lost and you realize they're lost, you can be like, look, come back. But it's not the only way, nor is it the most beautiful way, or the most pleasurable way, or the most fun way of experiencing reality. Beautiful, not the most beautiful. Poetic. And I also relate to the idea of the body and not owning the body, but differently. Again, the puritanicalness of these texts bother me, in that it is all suffering. My whole life has been suffering. I feel like what I have seen in the world, even as a child, before I was able to make judgments and had like international perceptions, pan cultural understandings, but people were just suffering and confused and sad and angry and lost in themselves, totally just like, I would see so many things as a kid and just be like, this doesn't make any sense, and yet this is how the entire world works, and it's been going like this for fucking hundreds of thousands of years. This is crazy. And it is crazy. And, there's that lovely quote by Krishnamurti that I love, where it's, being well adjusted to a profoundly sick society is not a mark of health. But with all of its sham drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. It's quoted from a poem. It's not... all of the suffering is not unworthy of experience. I don't know why there's 7 billion people and counting. I think that's a little overkill. I think it's way overkill. And it may have something to do with the greedy nature of humanity that doesn't make sense to me, about needing to have operatic proportions about everything, of just being like, oh, it'd be really great when we're all overblown and, just die in a horrible, dramatic, fiery death. That'll be great. We can tell the folks back home about that. The aliens, or wherever, planets or stars, or wherever the fuck the soul's life force comes to from this planet. I don't know. Those stories. Where did the souls come from? Who makes the souls? Is it one God that's been fragmented into millions of little fragments, or is... I'll write a book about it. But the point I'm making is the body, I've often felt, is like a pet, like a gift. Say there's an ego which I get is an elucidatory middleman, translator. Let's say the ego is like a translator. Yeah, a middleman. There's a better word that is not coming to my mind right now. It's 3 a.m. and I'm tired. But that there's an eternal self, and probably even the self that's interacting with the ego is not the eternal self, or rather not the whole eternal self. Probably, as I've perceived it, the self interacting through the ego with the body and the world is more whole than the myriad of bodies. I mean, I think that comes back to like the 12 archetype systems. That there's conglomerates of those that are interacting through the ego structure. But the ego structure is a lens, or a series of lenses, an apparatus that the eternal uses to navigate and enjoy the finite. And so I've always been more of a believer that we should support the ego and love it and understand, like a dog, that it's very lovable but kind of dumb, and has its uses, but really not all that many. You know, there are certain people that blur the boundaries. I'm definitely one of them, and what I want from the world, what I want from people when I love them, you know, I want them to be able to do everything that I want. Things that I can't even do, I want them to be able to do it with me. It's like people wanting their dog to live forever and be like a person and be like, I don't know. It's really easy to be disrespectful of the limits of the ego and the limits of the body. But even with all those limits, the body is a wonderful, 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 wonderful thing. I think it's great. And there are people who suffer in their body most of their lives, and a part of me believes that it's because they have a very bad relationship with their body. I've met so many people who hate their body all the time. It's like, I hate my body. They say that, I hate my body. There are people who hate their body their whole lives, so how can it be a fun experience for them? Of course it's going to have terrible, terrible malformations in it if you hate it all the time. I mean, it's a destructive energy to have if you're constantly shaming it and thinking it's ugly and thinking it's whatever. People think terrible things about themselves. And in that case, I mean selves being your body and your ego. Because that's what most people are relating to as their self on this plane, and I totally get that. It's very hard to relate to the one who's actually seeing everything, because it's not the ego. I mean, and that's what I think the usefulness of meditation is learning how to see the ego clearer. Because learning how to see the eternal self, you need a schism, you need distance, you need perception to be able to see the eternal self. And that's one of the things, like entheogens are really useful for that, because, I mean, that's the only time, is that the only time? I'm pretty sure that's the only time that I've really clearly gotten out of myself in such a way that I can see it with detail and understanding. And that's actually what I'm hoping to get through these long-seated meditations. I'm educating myself in the path because I think it's a respectful thing to do, but it's also like, well, maybe, well, I don't know. He was looking for truth, right? But the truth, the more useful truth that all of us can find are the ones that we find for ourselves, I think. Schizophrenic or antisocial as that may be, the path that each of us walks is the reason that there are each of us. And so, getting into that. And again, part of my trip is about perception and about why and about understanding. So it's then an obligation of that trip to understand, to be present to, and to articulate, and therefore be able to communicate. And then, because I can communicate, I must. But I don't think the body is just a greedy, nasty, confusing bag of rotten bones, corpse thing. I mean, like, I get it. I totally get the impermanence of the body. And I love the body in all of its forms. Like, I've seen some kids, and it's fascinating to look at kids. The youth, it's beautiful to see their enthusiasm. People in my age group, I used to have lust for, and I have some, but now that I'm in my age group, there's not as much disparity to create the desire. But I still have desire for the age disparity, and I love seeing old people. And when I say desire, I mean sexual desire, but I also just mean like a beauty attraction. Like there's a beauty, like I've always had the beauty that I perceive in the young is not attractive to me for some reason. I guess I've had it, as it were. I've not yet, in this body, in this ego, in this life, had being old. And I know it's wearying and tiring and painful, as is any age, but in different ways. But I still find the older bodies desiring and beautiful. All that to be said. Again, tired, 3 a.m. after being kind of manic, honestly. That I find the body is a really wonderful thing. I find it a miraculous animal that we get to live inside of, to interact with this realm, which can truthfully be called an illusion, because everything in existence is an illusion. But it's an illusion that's been going for quite a while. Time itself is an illusion, so a while means nothing in the eternal realms. But all of us have a similar eternal base, and the pathways of being split into these separate beings, these separate moments in time. I don't know if I really get into her shtick about, like, well, if you look in your mirror, are you that all these 10,000, selves that you've been? Just because the ocean has 1 billion waves, is it not the ocean? Because we're made up of trillions of cells, 1/3 of them not being produced by our body, or not our DNA. I guess that's the way of putting it. The microbiome that lives in our body and on our body. Is it still us? Being attached to ownership is always a problem. So it's not about worrying about if this is my body. I mean, and honestly, that's one of the reasons I've lived my life the way I have. Is this my body? What does that mean? What preciousness should I have about my body? I mean, of course, I've fantasized about the idea of being owned by another person and not being allowed to, or not being responsible for making the decisions about this body. But I have very particular decisions and beliefs I make about this body all the time, but I like to share it. I mean, it's anything beautiful and enjoyable in the world, I think, is so much better when you get to share it. So if I like my body, which I do, and I've learned to. I didn't when I was younger, but I have learned to like my body, love my body. It's more pleasant to share. And in learning to like and love my body, another big part of this meditation practice that is difficult for me is that I've learned to trust my body, to know that it can heal itself better than I can, and that healing is necessary, that healing is automatic, it's happening all the time, damage is happening all the time because of friction, and the body's healing itself all the time. But if something happens, like a sickness or a wound, because I'm piling it around, doing all sorts of silliness and having fun, maybe falling out of a tree or getting a cold or something, then I've always found that I can defer to my body's ability to heal itself better than what I can do manually, though I can assist in certain energetic ways. Or even like going to a doctor. I've avoided that for so long. I mean, in the last 9 years, I have been going to doctors, but I avoided it for so long because it was this idea that my body knows how to heal itself, and I can choose to connect my body to infinite energy, because the mind is really the mind, the original mind, the infinite mind, the eternal mind, not just the ego, but the eternal mind, has access to the entirety of existence outside of time and space. And if one is aware of that and allows the resonance of that truth to connect with and through the ego, with and through the body, then one can perform things such as called miracles in allowing infinity to flow. Because in infinity, in the eternity of the universe, there's more unknown than can ever be known. And in that unknown, in these mysteries, which is why I'm a mystic, in these mysteries, it allows for things we can't even imagine to happen. Thus, miraculous healings, or empowerments, or abilities, or knowledge flowing through, all sorts of unending things. My body knows how to speak, I don't. My body certainly knows how to breathe better than me, even though I've learned. And even all this I that I'm saying is ego. But the eternity behind me, whatever levels, frame self levels, the eternity behind me knows. Or has access to everything. Knowing is a type of ownership. Anyway, this is fizzling out. There's no passion here. I'm now wondering if my friend got to Kansas safely. But I'm tired. I'm going to upload these things. Yes, this too. For you who are bored with my readings and want to see me yammering on about my experience as opposed to someone else, repeating somebody else's belief. That's all she's doing, and she's channeling her life experience through an ancient belief system, or what we call an ancient belief system, for our education and to free us from suffering. Do I look like I'm suffering? I don't look like I'm suffering. Maybe I do look like I'm suffering. Am I suffering right now? Suffering exhaustion? No. Just tired. Wiggling my feet. It's a paradox of choice. Being oneself isn't suffering. Living in such a way that you cannot be yourself, and having to be yourself while not being able to be yourself, is suffering. And self in this realm is dependent upon other people and interaction with other people. So right alignment with other people is not suffering. But more often than not, we don't align very well with other people and we suffer. We clash. Friction. It's best to love and be present in such a way that there's space between each other. A sharing with, but not dependent. Not clinging, not grasping. Not clutching mother's hand quite so tightly. And it's tricky because that's what's really interesting to me, is how to be in this realm in a way, in a skillful way that's admirable and inspiring and educational. That's the inner yearning in me. I mean, obviously for my own self, I want this living experience to be not so painful. I want it to be blissful, joyful, loving, kind, friendly. I don't think about it being fun a lot. I think about sharing the joy and sharing the love and the beauty. There's so many beautiful things in the world. But I get so sad with the people I try to share my joys with who just aren't interested. I'm so mystified that I've met so many people, and yet I can't just be with someone who I feel like sympathizes and harmonizes with my joys. Maybe I'm not appreciating it. The mystery of relationship is where I suffer the most. Is that what being a Gemini's about? Is that what being a Dominic's about? I don't know.